Eleanor Harper had always loved the simple things in life. Her days began with the soft glow of sunrise spilling across her 50-acre farm, nestled deep in the heart of the countryside. The air smelled fresh and earthy, a mix of dew-kissed grass, and the faint aroma of wildflowers that grew along the edges of her fields. For Eleanor, this was paradise, a place where she could escape the chaos of the modern world and live at her own pace. She spent her mornings tending to rows of corn, tomatoes, and pumpkins, her afternoons feeding chickens and collecting eggs, and her evenings sitting on her porch, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. The farm wasn't just land. It was a legacy passed down through generations. Her grandparents had worked tirelessly to clear the rocky soil and plant the first seeds decades ago. Now, Eleanor carried on their traditions, nurturing the same soil that had fed her family for years. It wasn't glamorous work by any means. Her hands were often calloused, her clothes stained with dirt. But it brought her immense joy. Every harvest felt like a small victory. Every blooming flower a reminder of how beautiful life could be when you took care of something. But not everyone appreciated the charm of rural living. Over the years, developers started sniffing around Eleanor's property, eager to snatch up pieces of land to build shopping malls, housing complexes, or luxury resorts. They came knocking on her door with slick suits, polished shoes, and promises of big money. "Think about your future," they'd say, flashing bright smiles. "You could retire comfortably if you sold us your land." But Eleanor wasn't interested. Money meant nothing to her compared to the peace and fulfillment she found on her farm. So she politely declined each offer, shutting the door firmly behind her. Her refusal didn't sit well with everyone, though. One person in particular took offense. Karen Langley, the self-appointed queen of the local homeowners association, HOA. Karen was known throughout the community for being loud, opinionated, and utterly relentless when it came to enforcing rules, or bending them to suit her agenda. To her, progress meant development, and development meant profit. And in Karen's eyes, Eleanor's farm was nothing more than wasted potential. At first, Karen tried to reason with Eleanor. She sent polite letters asking if Eleanor would reconsider selling her land. When those went unanswered, Karen switched tactics. She began organizing meetings with other HOA members, painting Eleanor as an obstacle to growth. "That farm is an eyesore," Karen declared during one such gathering. "It lowers property values and ruins the neighborhood aesthetic. We need to do something about it." Karen's words gained traction among some residents who believed her exaggerated claims. Soon, Eleanor started receiving complaints, letters, slipped under her door or dropped in her mailbox, about everything from tractor noise disturbing the peace to stray animals wandering onto nearby lawns. Most of these accusations were baseless. Her tractors rarely ran past noon and her animals stayed securely fenced within her property. Still, the constant barrage of criticism wore on her. It seemed like no matter what she did, someone always found fault. Despite the pressure, Eleanor refused to give in. She knew her rights as a property owner and wasn't about to let Karen bully her into submission. What Karen didn't realize was that Eleanor wasn't just a farmer. She was smart, resourceful, and determined. Years earlier, Eleanor had inherited not only the farm but also her father's knack for understanding complex legal documents. Her dad had been a real estate attorney before he retired, and growing up, Eleanor had absorbed much of his knowledge. She spent countless evenings poring over old deeds, zoning laws, and property regulations, ensuring her farm was protected from exactly this kind of attack. One evening, while digging through a dusty box of papers in her attic, Eleanor stumbled upon something remarkable. Buried beneath stacks of yellowed documents was a clause granting her exclusive mineral rights to the land beneath her farm. Mineral rights meant that whatever valuable resources lay hidden underground, gold, silver, oil, natural gas, they belonged to her and her alone. At the time, the discovery didn't seem particularly significant. After all, no one had ever suggested there were riches lurking beneath her fields. But now, with Karen breathing down her neck, Eleanor decided to investigate further. She reached out to an old friend, Mark, who happened to be a geologist. Mark agreed to take a look at her property, curious to see if there was any truth to the mineral rights claim. After conducting tests and analyzing soil samples, Mark returned with surprising news. There were valuable deposits beneath Eleanor's land. Not gold or oil, but limestone and gravel. Materials highly sought after by construction companies. While not glamorous, these resources were still worth a fortune. Armed with this newfound information, Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. If Karen thought she could push her around, she was sorely mistaken. Eleanor knew she had leverage now, though she kept it to herself for the time being. Instead, she focused on strengthening her position, gathering evidence to prove her ownership, and preparing for whatever battle lay ahead. Little did Karen know she was walking straight into a trap, one Eleanor had been setting patiently, piece by piece. Life on the farm continued as usual, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Eleanor watched silently as Karen escalated, her campaign, rallying neighbors and filing frivolous complaints. Yet Eleanor remained calm, confident in her preparations. She knew that sooner or later, Karen's greed would lead her to make a mistake, and when that happened, Eleanor would be ready. For now, she simply waited, biding her time until the right moment arrived. Karen Langley wasn't the type of person to give up easily. When her initial attempts to convince Eleanor Harper to sell her farm failed, she didn't back down. She doubled down. If Eleanor wouldn't budge with polite requests and reasonable offers, Karen decided it was time to turn up the heat. She began rallying her troops within the Homeowners Association, HOA, painting Eleanor as a stubborn obstacle standing in the way of progress. "We're talking about transforming this sleepy little town into something modern, something profitable," Karen declared at one of their meetings. "But every time we try to move forward, Eleanor drags us backward." Her words struck a chord with some members of the HOA, especially those who had recently moved to the area seeking suburban comfort rather than rural charm. To them, Eleanor's farm was an eyesore, a patchwork of fields and barns that clashed with their vision of manicured lawns and white picket fences. Encouraged by Karen's fiery speeches, they started chiming in with complaints. One neighbor claimed Eleanor's roosters woke them up too early. Another said her tractor disturbed their peace during the day. Yet another insisted Eleanor's cows wandered onto their property, even though her cattle were securely fenced. The letters began arriving weekly, sometimes even daily, each one more exaggerated than the last. Eleanor would find them tucked under her door or stuffed into her mailbox, filled with accusations that ranged from petty to outright ridiculous. "Your animals are ruining our gardens," read one letter. "The smell from your compost pile is unbearable," said another. Some neighbors even called the local authorities, reporting non-existent violations like illegal dumping or hazardous waste storage. Each complaint forced Eleanor to spend hours responding, gathering evidence and proving her innocence. Despite the mounting pressure, Eleanor refused to let Karen get under her skin. She knew most of these grievances were baseless, the kind of nitpicking that came from boredom or jealousy rather than genuine concern. Her chickens stayed inside coops at night, her tractors rarely ran past noon, and her cows hadn't stepped foot outside their paddocks in years. Still, dealing with the constant harassment took its toll. It wasn't just the wasted time or the frustration. It was the feeling that people she once considered neighbors now viewed her as an enemy. Karen, however, wasn't satisfied with mere annoyance. She wanted results, and she wanted them fast. Frustrated by Eleanor's resilience, Karen shifted gears. Instead of relying solely on complaints, she devised a bold plan. If Eleanor wouldn't sell her land voluntarily, Karen would take matters into her own hands. Late one evening, after yet another fruitless HOA meeting, Karen sat at her kitchen table surrounded by legal documents, zoning maps, and coffee-stained notes. Her eyes gleamed with determination. "If she won't cooperate," Karen muttered to herself, "then I'll make sure she has no choice." Karen's scheme involved exploiting loopholes in local zoning laws. She pored over outdated regulations, searching for anything that could justify seizing control of Eleanor's property. Eventually, she stumbled upon what she believed was the perfect loophole, a decades-old clause stating that agricultural land could be rezoned for commercial use if it was deemed underutilized. Armed with this discovery, Karen set out to gather support from other HOA members and local officials. She argued passionately that Eleanor's farm wasn't producing enough revenue to justify its size and location. "Why should one person hog all this land when the rest of us can benefit?" she asked rhetorically during a heated HOA meeting. "Imagine what we could do with it: a resort, a shopping center, maybe even a golf course." To bolster her case, Karen hired a team of consultants to draft reports exaggerating the supposed inefficiency of Eleanor's farm. These reports painted a misleading picture, claiming the land was barren and unproductive despite clear evidence to the contrary. Meanwhile, Karen worked tirelessly behind the scenes, calling in favors from friends in local government offices and using questionable connections to push her agenda forward. Slowly but surely, she managed to secure permits allowing construction on Eleanor's property, all without Eleanor's knowledge or consent. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor woke up to the sound of engines roaring in the distance. Stepping outside, she froze in disbelief. A convoy of bulldozers and trucks had rolled onto her land, tearing through fences and marking boundaries with bright orange flags. Workers swarmed the fields, leveling sections of her crops and digging trenches for foundations. For a moment, Eleanor felt paralyzed, watching years of hard work being destroyed before her eyes. But then anger surged through her veins. This wasn't just an attack on her livelihood. It was an assault on everything she held dear. Instead of panicking, Eleanor retreated to her house where she locked the door and grabbed her phone. She dialed Mark, her geologist friend, first. "Mark, they're here," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding outside. "They've started construction." After hanging up, she called her lawyer, a trusted colleague of her, late father's who specialized in property disputes. Together, they reviewed the situation and formulated a plan. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor filed a lawsuit against Karen and the HOA, citing trespassing, illegal construction, and breach of property rights. The battle had officially moved from the fields to the courtroom. As news of the lawsuit spread, the community became divided. Some residents rallied behind Karen, believing her promises of economic growth and prosperity. Others, however, sided with Eleanor, outraged by the heavy-handed tactics used against her. Local farmers, in particular, voiced their support, seeing Eleanor's fight as a stand against corporate greed and urban sprawl. "If they can do this to her," one farmer told a reporter, "what's stopping them from coming after the rest of us?" Meanwhile, Karen remained unfazed by the backlash. In her mind, Eleanor's resistance was merely a temporary setback, a minor speed bump on the road to success. She continued overseeing the construction project, confident that her legal maneuvers would hold up in court. What Karen failed to realize, however, was that Eleanor wasn't just fighting blindly. She was playing chess while Karen played checkers. Every move Karen made only tightened the noose around her own neck, pulling her deeper into Eleanor's carefully laid trap. For Eleanor, the days leading up to the trial were tense but focused. She spent hours reviewing documents, preparing testimony, and strategizing with her lawyer. Though the weight of the situation bore down on her, she drew strength from the knowledge that she was doing the right thing, not just for herself, but for everyone who valued the beauty and simplicity of rural life. As she stood on her porch, one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. Karen might have thought she had the upper hand, but Eleanor knew better. The real game was only beginning. Eleanor Harper had always been a woman of quiet determination, but beneath her calm exterior lay a mind as sharp as a tack. Growing up in the shadow of her father, a seasoned real estate attorney who spent his career navigating the complexities of property law, Eleanor absorbed more than she realized. While other kids played outside or watched television, Eleanor pored over legal textbooks and listened intently as her father explained the intricacies of deeds, contracts, and zoning laws. At the time, she never imagined how valuable those lessons would become, but now, as Karen Langley tightened her grip on Eleanor's life, every ounce of that knowledge proved indispensable. When Eleanor discovered the mineral rights clause buried deep within the old deeds of her farm, it felt like finding a hidden treasure map. The language was dense and technical, written in legalese that most people wouldn't understand without years of study. To Eleanor, however, it was crystal clear. The land beneath her feet, and everything underneath it, belonged exclusively to her. No one else could stake a claim to it, not even the Homeowners Association, HOA, or any developer they brought into the mix. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was armor, a shield she could use to protect her home and livelihood, but knowing about the mineral rights was only half the battle. Eleanor needed proof that these rights were worth something tangible, something that could tip the scales in her favor if things escalated further. That's when she reached out to Mark, her geologist friend. Mark had always been a reliable ally, someone who shared Eleanor's love for the land and understood its value beyond surface-level appearances. When she asked him to investigate the potential resources beneath her soil, he didn't hesitate. "If there's anything down there," Mark promised, "I'll find it." Weeks later, Mark returned with results that took Eleanor's breath away. Beneath her fields lay vast deposits of limestone and gravel, materials highly sought after by construction companies for building roads, bridges, and foundations. These weren't glamorous resources like gold or oil, but they were still incredibly valuable, especially given the growing demand for infrastructure projects in the region. The discovery changed everything. Suddenly, Eleanor wasn't just fighting to save her farm, she was sitting on a gold mine, literally and figuratively. With this new information in hand, Eleanor began crafting her strategy. She knew Karen's ultimate goal was to seize control of her property, either through intimidation or legal manipulation. What Karen didn't know was that Eleanor had already laid the groundwork for a counterattack. Over countless late-night sessions at her kitchen table, Eleanor meticulously documented every interaction with Karen, every complaint filed against her, and every suspicious move made by the HOA. She gathered receipts, photos, and witness statements, building a dossier so comprehensive that it left no room for doubt. If Karen thought she could steamroll over Eleanor, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Eleanor also took steps to secure her financial future. Using her savings and some strategic loans, she quietly invested in eco-friendly upgrades for her farm. Solar panels went up on the barn roof, rainwater collection systems replaced outdated irrigation methods, and native plants were planted along the edges of her fields to prevent erosion. These changes weren't just practical, they were symbolic. Eleanor wanted to show the world that her farm wasn't an obstacle to progress. It was a model of sustainable living, a testament to what could be achieved when humans worked in harmony with nature. As Karen ramped up her campaign of harassment, Eleanor remained calm, almost eerily so. She knew Karen's tactics inside and out because she'd seen them before. Not firsthand, but through stories her father used to tell about unscrupulous developers trying to exploit loopholes in the law. Eleanor recognized the signs, the vague accusations, the fabricated reports, the relentless push for rezoning. Karen might have thought she was clever, but Eleanor saw right through her. Every letter slipped under her door, every call to local authorities, every exaggerated complaint from disgruntled neighbors. It all fit a pattern Eleanor had studied extensively. What Karen failed to grasp was that Eleanor wasn't just reacting to her attacks. She was anticipating them. Long before the bulldozers rolled onto her property, Eleanor had consulted with her lawyer to draft contingency plans for every possible scenario. They explored options ranging from injunctions to stop construction to countersuits seeking damages for trespassing and destruction of property. Eleanor even considered leveraging her mineral rights as a bargaining chip, though she kept that card close to her chest for now. The key, her lawyer reminded her, was timing. "You don't play your ace until you absolutely have to," he advised. "Let Karen dig her own grave first." And dig she did. As Karen pressed forward with her plan, oblivious to the trap being set around her, Eleanor watched silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She knew Karen's arrogance would eventually trip her up, that inevitable misstep where greed outweighed caution. Until then, Eleanor focused on strengthening her position, ensuring that every document, every contract, and every piece of evidence was ironclad. She visited local farmers markets, networking with others who shared her values and spreading awareness about the importance of preserving rural lands. She spoke with reporters, framing her story not as a personal vendetta, but as a larger fight against corporate overreach and environmental neglect. The community response surprised even Eleanor. Many residents who initially sided with Karen began questioning her motives once they learned about the true extent of her actions. Some admitted they'd been swayed by her charisma and promises of prosperity without fully understanding the consequences. Others expressed outrage at the blatant disregard for property rights and due process. Slowly but surely, public opinion shifted in Eleanor's favor. People started seeing her not as a stubborn holdout, but as a champion of integrity and justice. Through it all, Eleanor maintained her composure. She refused to stoop to Karen's level, choosing instead to let her actions speak louder than words. When neighbors accused her of being difficult or unreasonable, she simply smiled and invited them to visit her farm. They walked among her thriving crops, watched her chickens pecking happily in their coops, and marveled at the beauty of her wildflower meadows. By the time they left, many had softened their stance, realizing that Eleanor's way of life wasn't something to destroy. It was something to celebrate. Karen, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. She continued pushing forward with her resort project, convinced that victory was within reach. Construction crews worked tirelessly, erecting skeletal frames of buildings and carving paths through Eleanor's once pristine fields. Karen attended ribbon-cutting ceremonies and hosted press conferences, basking in the spotlight while ignoring the cracks forming beneath her foundation. To her, Eleanor was merely a nuisance, a stubborn relic of the past destined to fade away. But Eleanor knew better. Every nail hammered into her land, every tree felled, every acre paved over, it all fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming her property anymore, it was about sending a message. Eleanor wanted Karen, and anyone else who dared follow in her footsteps, to understand that rural communities weren't playgrounds for profit-driven schemes. They were sanctuaries, places where hard work, patience, and respect for the earth yielded rewards far greater than money could buy. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor prepared herself for the next phase of her plan. She reviewed her documents, one last time, triple-checking every detail to ensure nothing was overlooked. She rehearsed her testimony, imagining every question Karen's lawyers might throw at her, and crafting responses that were both factual and compelling. And she visualized the courtroom, picturing herself standing tall and unwavering as she defended her home, her legacy, and her future. In the quiet moments before sleep, Eleanor allowed herself to dream. She envisioned a day when the chaos would subside, when her farm would return to its peaceful rhythm. She saw herself walking through rows of golden wheat, hearing the laughter of children staying in the eco-friendly cabins she planned to build. She imagined tourists marveling at the simplicity and beauty of her land, leaving with a renewed appreciation for the natural world. Most importantly, she pictured Karen defeated, humbled, and forced to reckon with the consequences of her greed. For now, though, Eleanor stayed patient. The wheels of justice moved slowly, but they moved steadily. All she had to do was wait, and trust that her careful planning would pay off. Because in the end, Eleanor Harper wasn't just protecting her farm. She was proving that sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths, and Karen Langley was about to hear hers loud and clear. The courtroom was a place of tension, where emotions ran high and every word carried weight. For Eleanor Harper, it was also a battleground, a stage where she would finally confront Karen Langley face to face. The air inside the room felt heavy, thick with anticipation as lawyers shuffled papers, judges adjusted their robes, and spectators whispered among themselves. Eleanor sat quietly at her table, her posture straight but relaxed, exuding an aura of calm confidence. Across the aisle, Karen fidgeted nervously, her polished facade beginning to crack under the pressure. The trial began with opening statements. Karen's lawyer took the floor first, painting a picture of Eleanor as an obstructionist standing in the way of progress. He spoke passionately about economic growth, job creation, and the benefits of modern development. "This isn't just about one person's property," he declared, pointing dramatically toward Eleanor. "It's about creating opportunities for everyone in this community." His words were smooth, rehearsed, designed to tug at heartstrings and sway opinions. But Eleanor listened intently, her expression unreadable, knowing exactly how to dismantle his arguments when her turn came. When Eleanor's lawyer rose to speak, the tone of the courtroom shifted. Gone were the grand promises and lofty ideals. Instead, there was clarity, precision, and undeniable evidence. He laid out the facts systematically, starting with the history of Eleanor's farm and her family's legacy on the land. He presented documents proving Eleanor's ownership, including the deed that explicitly granted her exclusive mineral rights, a detail Karen's side had conveniently ignored. Then came photographs of the destruction caused by the unauthorized construction, flattened crops, torn down fences, and polluted streams. Each image told a story of loss and violation, reinforcing the idea that Karen's actions weren't just misguided, they were illegal. As the days wore on, witnesses were called to testify. Neighbors who initially supported Karen found themselves squirming under cross-examination as Eleanor's lawyer exposed inconsistencies in their testimonies. One man claimed Eleanor's tractors kept him awake at night, only to admit under questioning that he lived miles away from the farm. Another woman accused Eleanor's cows of wandering onto her lawn, despite photographic evidence showing the animals securely penned within their paddocks. With each revelation, Karen's case grew weaker, her credibility crumbling like a house of cards. But the real turning point came when Mark, Eleanor's geologist friend, took the stand. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, Mark looked more like a farmer than an expert witness. Yet his testimony carried immense authority. Using maps, soil samples, and geological surveys, he explained the significance of the mineral deposits beneath Eleanor's land. "These resources are not only valuable," he stated firmly, "but they belong exclusively to Ms. Harper according to the terms of her deed. Any attempt to develop this land without her consent constitutes trespassing and potentially theft." Karen's lawyer tried to challenge Mark's findings, peppering him with questions meant to cast doubt on his expertise or the accuracy of his data. But Mark remained unshaken, answering each query with patience and professionalism. By the time he stepped down from the stand, even the judge seemed impressed, nodding thoughtfully as he reviewed the exhibits submitted into evidence. Meanwhile, Karen struggled to maintain her composure. Her usual bravado faltered as the reality of her predicament sank in. Every accusation leveled against her hit its mark, exposing flaws in her planning and execution. When it was her turn to testify, she stumbled over her answers, contradicting herself multiple times. Under relentless questioning from Eleanor's lawyer, Karen admitted to forging signatures on certain permits and pressuring local officials to expedite approvals, revelations that shocked even her staunchest supporters. In the gallery, throughout the proceedings, Eleanor remained composed, her focus unwavering. She didn't need to shout or make dramatic gestures. Her presence alone commanded respect. When she finally took the stand, her testimony resonated deeply with everyone in the room. Speaking softly but clearly, she recounted her love for the farm, the sacrifices her family had made to preserve it, and the pain of seeing it desecrated by greed. "This land isn't just dirt and rocks," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "It's my home, it's my heritage, and I won't let anyone take that away from me. Not now, not ever." Her words struck a chord, not just with the jury, but with many of the spectators as well. Some wiped away tears while others nodded in agreement. Even Karen, sitting across the aisle, couldn't help but glance at Eleanor with a flicker of unease. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the enormity of what she'd done, and the consequences awaiting her if she lost. As closing arguments approached, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew electric. Karen's lawyer gave it one last push, attempting to frame the dispute as a clash between tradition and progress. "We're not asking for much," he pleaded. just a chance to bring prosperity to this town. But Eleanor's lawyer countered with a powerful rebuttal, reminding the court of the rule of law and the sanctity of private property. Ms. Harper has done nothing wrong, he argued. She followed every regulation, paid her taxes, and cared for her land responsibly. To reward those who break the law is to undermine justice itself. Finally, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the verdict arrived. The judge delivered his ruling with measured authority, condemning Karen's actions and siding unequivocally with Eleanor. Not only did he order an immediate halt to all construction activities on her property, but he also ruled that Karen and the HOA must compensate Eleanor for damages incurred during their illegal takeover attempt. Furthermore, he invalidated the permits Karen had secured through forgery, rendering her entire project null and void. For Eleanor, the victory was bittersweet. While she was relieved to have her rights vindicated, she couldn't ignore the toll the ordeal had taken on her life. Her fields bore scars that would take years to heal, and her once peaceful existence had been disrupted in ways she never imagined. Still, she chose to focus on the positives. Justice had prevailed and her farm remained hers. As she left the courthouse that day, surrounded by friends and supporters, she allowed herself a small smile. The hardest part was over, but the real work was just beginning. Back at the farm, Eleanor surveyed the damage with a more hopeful outlook. Though the bulldozers had left deep gouges in her soil and toppled several trees, she saw opportunity amidst the wreckage. With the compensation awarded by the court, she could begin restoring her land, replanting crops, and repairing infrastructure. More importantly, she now had leverage, a legal foothold that ensured no one could threaten her again without facing severe repercussions. Karen, on the other hand, faced a reckoning. Stripped of her power and prestige, she retreated from public view, humiliated by the exposure of her unethical tactics. Rumors swirled about lawsuits filed against her by investors who had poured money into the failed resort project, further complicating her already precarious situation. For someone who thrived on control and influence, losing both was a devastating blow. Eleanor knew better than to gloat. Revenge wasn't her style. She preferred to let karma handle things. Instead, she focused on rebuilding not just her farm but her spirit. The trial had tested her in ways she never anticipated, forcing her to confront fears and doubts she'd buried long ago. But it had also strengthened her resolve, reminding her why she loved the land so much. It wasn't just about survival. It was about connection, resilience, and hope. In the months that followed, Eleanor transformed her farm into a symbol of renewal. She planted new crops, introduced sustainable farming practices, and opened parts of her property to educational tours, teaching visitors about agriculture and conservation. Slowly but surely, life returned to normal, or rather, a new kind of normal, one shaped by lessons learned and battles won. And though Karen's shadow still lingered in the background, Eleanor refused to let it darken her path. She had fought hard for her future, and she intended to enjoy every moment of it. The courtroom verdict was a seismic event, sending shockwaves through the community and leaving Karen Langley reeling. For Eleanor Harper, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with both challenges and opportunities. The judge's ruling had been unequivocal. Karen's actions were illegal, her permits invalid, and her entire project on Eleanor's land null and void. Not only did the court order an immediate halt to all construction activities, but it also mandated that Karen and the HOA compensate Eleanor for the damages inflicted during their unauthorized takeover. It was a decisive victory, one that restored Eleanor's faith in justice and gave her the leverage she needed to take back control. But winning the legal battle wasn't enough to undo the damage already done. As Eleanor returned to her farm, she was met with a scene of devastation. What had once been lush fields of golden wheat and vibrant vegetables was now scarred by bulldozer tracks and littered with debris. Trees that had stood for decades lay uprooted, their gnarled roots exposed to the sky. Fences were torn apart, and sections of her property resembled a war zone rather than the peaceful haven she cherished. Despite the destruction, Eleanor refused to let despair consume her. Instead, she saw this as a chance to rebuild, not just her farm, but her vision for the future. Eleanor wasted no time getting to work. With the compensation awarded by the court, she hired local contractors to help repair the most urgent issues. Broken fences were mended, irrigation systems were restored, and damaged soil was treated to prepare it for planting. She worked tirelessly alongside her team, her hands caked with dirt as she replanted crops and nurtured young saplings. Each seed sown felt like a small act of defiance against those who sought to destroy her way of life. "This land is resilient," Eleanor often said to herself, "and so am I." While Eleanor focused on healing her farm, Karen struggled to pick up the pieces of her shattered reputation. The trial had exposed her unethical tactics for all to see, turning her from a respected figure in the community into a pariah. Investors who had poured money into the resort project demanded answers and refunds, leaving Karen financially strapped. Her once confident demeanor crumbled under the weight of mounting lawsuits and public scrutiny. Friends and allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone whose greed had caused so much harm. For Karen, the fall from grace was swift and merciless. Despite her troubles, Karen wasn't ready to admit defeat. Desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, she approached Eleanor with a proposal: allow the partially constructed resort to remain on her land in exchange for a share of the profits. At first glance, it seemed like a pragmatic solution, a way to recoup some of her losses while avoiding further conflict. But Eleanor saw through the thinly veiled attempt at redemption. She knew Karen hadn't changed. She was simply trying to wriggle out of responsibility. Still, Eleanor agreed to hear her out, sensing an opportunity to turn the tables even further. When they met at Eleanor's kitchen table, the air was thick with tension. Karen, dressed in a modest blouse and slacks, looked nothing like the polished powerhouse she used to be. Her usual bravado was replaced by nervous fidgeting as she laid out her plan. "I know things got messy," Karen began, her voice trembling slightly. "But we can still make this work for both of us." She outlined a lease agreement that would grant her permission to operate the resort on Eleanor's property, offering a percentage of revenue as rent. To sweeten the deal, she promised to prioritize eco-friendly practices and involve the local community in its operations. Eleanor listened silently, her expression unreadable. When Karen finished speaking, she leaned back in her chair and studied her rival carefully. Finally, she spoke. "You've caused me more grief than you can imagine," Eleanor said evenly. "But I'm willing to consider your offer, if the terms are right." Karen perked up, mistaking Eleanor's words for leniency. What she didn't realize was that Eleanor had already consulted her lawyer and drafted a counter-proposal designed to maximize her advantage. The lease agreement Eleanor presented was far from generous. Under its terms, Karen would pay exorbitant monthly fees just to keep the resort operational. Any profits generated would be split heavily in Eleanor's favor, ensuring that Karen barely broke even after covering expenses. Additionally, Eleanor included clauses giving her full authority to terminate the agreement at any time if Karen violated environmental or zoning regulations, even minor infractions. It was a clever trap disguised as compromise, one that Karen eagerly signed without fully grasping its implications. Unbeknownst to Karen, Eleanor had another ace up her sleeve. While allowing the resort to stay, she secretly negotiated deals with mining companies interested in extracting the limestone and gravel deposits beneath her land. These negotiations had been ongoing since Mark's discovery, and now, with the legal dust settled, Eleanor finalized contracts that granted the companies access to specific areas of her property. Every truckload of material shipped out added to her growing fortune, creating a steady stream of income that dwarfed anything Karen could hope to earn from the resort. As months passed, the cracks in Karen's operation began to show. Running a luxury resort proved far more expensive than she anticipated, especially given the steep lease payments she owed Eleanor. Maintenance costs skyrocketed, guest reviews plummeted, and bookings dwindled as word spread about the subpar experience. Meanwhile, Eleanor thrived. She reinvested her earnings into sustainable farming practices and expanded her eco-friendly initiatives, attracting tourists eager to experience authentic rural living. Visitors stayed in cozy cabins nestled among wildflower meadows, participated in guided tours of her farm, and enjoyed meals made from fresh, locally sourced ingredients. The contrast between her thriving enterprise and Karen's struggling resort couldn't have been starker. Karen grew increasingly desperate as her financial situation worsened. She cut corners wherever she could, scrimping on staff wages, skimping on maintenance, and ignoring complaints from dissatisfied guests. Her attempts to market the resort as a high-end destination fell flat, undermined by negative reviews and rising competition from Eleanor's burgeoning agritourism business. Even her efforts to secure additional funding failed, as investors balked at the prospect of throwing good money after bad. By the end of the year, the resort teetered on the brink of collapse. Through it all, Eleanor maintained her composure, watching calmly as Karen's empire unraveled. She never gloated or rubbed salt in the wound. Instead, she focused on building a brighter future for herself and her community. Local farmers praised her resilience, crediting her with standing up to corporate greed and preserving the integrity of their shared way of life. Tourists raved about the charm and authenticity of her farm, spreading the word to friends and family. Slowly but surely, Eleanor transformed her property into a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of perseverance and principle. For Karen, the writing was on the wall. Stripped of her wealth, influence, and dignity, she became a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and unchecked ambition. Once admired for her drive and determination, she was now mocked for her recklessness and disregard for others. Her name became synonymous with failure, a reminder that shortcuts and deceit rarely lead to lasting success. Eventually, unable to bear the shame, Karen packed her bags and left town, disappearing from the lives of those she had once dominated. As the dust settled, Eleanor reflected on everything she had endured. The battle with Karen had tested her in ways she never imagined, forcing her to confront fears and doubts she thought she'd long overcome. Yet it had also strengthened her resolve, teaching her valuable lessons about resilience, strategy, and the importance of staying true to oneself. More importantly, it reaffirmed her love for the land and the simple joys of rural living. Standing on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace. The fight was over, and she had emerged, victorious not just in court but in spirit. Her farm, though scarred, was alive with possibility. New crops sprouted in fields once trampled by bulldozers, and trees planted in place of those lost reached skyward with hopeful branches. Eleanor's dream of creating a sustainable sanctuary had come true, not despite the challenges she faced, but because of them. And though Karen's shadow lingered faintly in the background, Eleanor chose not to dwell on the past. Instead, she looked ahead, ready to embrace whatever the future held. After all, she had proven time and again that no obstacle was too great to overcome, not when you stood firm on solid ground.